The envelope hit the granite counter with a soft slide that sounded less like a delivery and more like the falling blade of a guillotine, severing the last thread of my patience. I never imagined that grieving my father would come with an invoice attached, until the woman he married put a price tag on my own home. I used to think rock bottom was a specific coordinate on a map. For me, it had always been the winter I spent sleeping on a leaking air mattress in a drafty one-bedroom apartment in Tacoma, Washington. I was 22 then, working double shifts at a diner just to afford instant ramen and keep the heat on. I thought that kind of cold, the kind that settles in your marrow and refuses to leave, was the worst feeling in the world. Turns out rock bottom has levels, has basements, and nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the basement I found myself in 3 months after my father's funeral. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and weeping rain against the windows, typical for the Pacific Northwest. I was standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in. It was a beautiful craftsman home my father had bought 30 years ago, filled with the scent of old wood, lemon polish, and the lingering ghostly aroma of his pipe tobacco. But lately, those smells were being strangled by the cloying scent of Darlene's gardenia perfume. Darlene, my stepmother of 5 years, stood on the other side of the kitchen island. She was wearing a silk robe that I knew cost more than my car, sipping coffee from a mug that said Queen Bee. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, despite it being 9 a.m., but her nails, chipped red polish that looked like dried blood, tapped rhythmically on the white envelope she had just shoved toward me. "Rent is going up to $800 a month, Madison," she said. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She used that sing-song fake sweet voice she reserved for phone calls with the insurance company or when she was pretending to care about my day in front of the neighbors. I stared at the envelope. My brain refused to process the words. "Excuse me. 800, she repeated, her smile not reaching her eyes. Never did. Her eyes were hard little marbles of flint. "Inflation, sweetie. Costs are rising. The heating bill alone was astronomical last month. We all have to pitch in." I looked around the kitchen. The sink was piled high with dishes crusty with dried lasagna sauce. The counter was littered with empty energy drink cans and greasy pizza boxes. None of that mess was mine. "Darlene," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were trembling by my sides. "I already buy all the groceries. I pay the internet bill. I do the landscaping on weekends. You want me to pay rent to live in my father's house?" Her expression shifted instantly. The fake sweetness evaporated, replaced by a sneer that revealed the bitterness she usually kept tucked away under layers of foundation. "My house, Madison," she corrected sharply. "Your father passed away. He left me as the head of this household. And in the real world, adults pay rent. You've been coasting here for 3 months, moping around, acting like the world owes you a favor just because you're sad. Well, guess what? We're all sad. But bills still need to be paid." I felt the air leave my lungs. Coasting. I had been the one organizing the funeral while she shopped for black dresses. I had been the one meeting with the florists while she complained about the humidity. I was the one working a corporate job from 8 to 5. Coming home to clean up after her 2 grown sons, and then hiding in my room to cry so I wouldn't disturb her grieving process. "I'm not coasting," I whispered. "I'm surviving." "Well, survival costs $800 due by Friday," she said, tapping the envelope again. "Or you can find another place to stay. I'm sure there are plenty of lovely apartments in Tacoma that would love to have you." Just then, the kitchen door swung open and Travis shuffled in. My stepbrother. He was 23, but he moved with the sluggish apathy of a teenager who had just woken up at noon, which, to be fair, he probably had. He was wearing purely boxer briefs and a t-shirt stained with something orange, scratching his stomach as he yawned. "Mom, did you buy more Hot Pockets?" he grumbled, ignoring my presence entirely. He opened the fridge, staring blankly into the abyss of food I had purchased 2 days ago. "They're on the list, baby," Darlene cooed, her voice instantly transforming back to syrup. "Madison is going to the store later. Aren't you, Madison?" I looked at Travis. Then I looked at the ceiling, where I could hear the thumping bass of EDM music. That would be Colby, the 25-year-old elder statesman of freeloading, likely starting his day of streaming career development, which mostly involved screaming at 12-year-olds on Fortnite. They were invaders, parasites. They had moved in 5 days after Dad's funeral. They didn't have jobs. They didn't clean. They didn't contribute a single dime. They ate everything I bought, used the high-speed internet I paid for, and treated me like an unwanted guest in the home where I had learned to walk. "Travis," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Do you pay rent?" Travis blinked, looking at me like I had spoken in Mandarin. He pulled a carton of milk out of the fridge and drank directly from the spout. "Huh. Rent," I said, staring at Darlene. "Does Travis pay $800 a month? Does Colby?" Darlene let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "They are my children, Madison. They are getting back on their feet. It's a transition period. You, however, are a gainfully employed adult who is taking advantage of a widow's hospitality." Hospitality. The word tasted like ash. "This was my father's home," I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. Not from sadness, but from a rage so hot it felt like it could melt the linoleum. "He wouldn't want this. He wouldn't want you extortioning me." Darlene stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of gardenias was suffocating. "He wanted me to be taken care of. That was his dying wish. If you can't respect that, and if you can't contribute to this household, then you don't belong here. Pay the money by Friday, Madison. Or pack your bags." She turned her back on me, dismissing me as if I were hired help, and began doting on Travis, asking if he wanted scrambled eggs. I stood there for a long moment watching them. Travis wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and belched. Darlene hummed a little tune as she cracked eggs into a pan, eggs I had bought. The house, the beautiful structure my father had built and maintained with such pride, felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in to crush me. I looked at the envelope on the counter. Inside, I knew, was a lease agreement she had probably downloaded off the internet. I grabbed the envelope. Not to sign it, but to get it out of my sight. "Friday," Darlene called out as I turned to leave the kitchen. "Cash or check is fine. No Venmo." I walked out of the kitchen, down the hallway lined with photos of my father. Photos Darlene had slowly started moving to the back of the shelves to make room for pictures of her boys. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, the bass from Colby's room thumping rhythmically against my skull. I closed my door and locked it. It was the only lock in the house I was allowed to use. I leaned against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor, clutching the envelope to my chest. I felt trapped, felt small. I felt exactly how she wanted me to feel. Powerless. But as I sat there, listening to the muffled sounds of Travis complaining about the lack of bacon downstairs, something shifted in my chest. It wasn't the grief anymore. It was clarity. She thought she had won. She thought the power dynamic was set in stone. She was the owner and I was the tenant. She thought my silence over the last 3 months was submission. She didn't know about the safe deposit box. She didn't know about the letter. And she certainly didn't know that rock bottom creates a very solid foundation to push off from. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Tuesday. I had until Friday. I stood up and tossed the envelope onto my desk. I wasn't going to pay her rent. I wasn't going to pack my bags. I wiped my face, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself. I looked tired. I looked pale. But for the first time in months, I didn't look defeated. "Okay, Darlene," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to talk about money? Let's talk about money. Have you ever had a family member kick you while you were down, just to make a quick buck off your misery? It's a betrayal that cuts deeper than any knife. If you've ever dealt with toxic family entitlement, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and we need to stick together against people like this. Wednesday was a blur of spreadsheets and suppressed rage. I left work 2 hours early, pleading a migraine, which wasn't entirely a lie. The pressure behind my eyes was building with every hour that ticked closer to Darlene's Friday deadline. Pulled into the driveway. Darlene's car was gone, likely at her weekly wellness spa appointment, but Travis's beat-up sedan was blocking the garage. I unlocked the front door quietly. I didn't have the energy for a confrontation yet. I just wanted to grab the heavy metal box I had retrieved from the bank that morning on my lunch break and hide in my room. But as I stepped into the foyer, laughter drifted from the living room. It was that raucous, hyena-like cackle that meant Travis and Colby were together. "Dude, seriously," Travis's voice carried clearly. "Once she moves out, we can finally renovate this place. Mom already called the contractor." I froze, my hand still gripping the doorknob. "Yeah," Colby replied, the sound of a video game pausing in the background. "We'll turn Maddie's room into a streaming studio. The lighting in there is perfect. I'm gonna soundproof the walls so I can scream without Mom nagging." "She's gonna leave," Travis said confidently. "Mom said she's broke. She can't afford $800. She'll be gone by the weekend." "Good riddance," Colby snorted. "She's such a buzzkill." I stood there paralyzed. It wasn't just that they wanted me gone. It was the entitlement. They were already carving up my life, measuring the square footage of my childhood sanctuary to turn it into a playroom for two grown men who refused to work. Streaming studio. The audacity made my stomach churn. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. A cold, steely calm washed over me. I backed out of the door silently, closed it, and then opened it again, stomping my feet loudly to announce my arrival. The laughter in the living room died instantly. When I walked past the archway, they were both staring at their phones, feigning innocence. I marched upstairs, the metal box in my tote bag feeling heavier with every step. That night, with my door locked and a chair wedged under the handle for good measure, I sat on my floor and opened the safe deposit box. My father had given me the key 3 days before he died, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "For when the dust settles, Maddie," he had whispered. Inside lay a thick stack of papers. The original will. I unfolded the document. My eyes scanned the legalese until they landed on the paragraph that mattered. One sentence practically burned through the page. "I leave the house, all assets, and the $1.2 million trust to my daughter Madison. No other party is entitled to any portion." I reread it 3 times. My hands were shaking. They weren't just rude. They were planning to steal a home and a future they had zero claim to. Darlene didn't own this house. She didn't own anything. And that's when plot twist number 1 dropped. Under the will was a smaller envelope. A private note sealed with Scotch tape. On the front, in Dad's shaky handwriting, it said, "Read only if necessary." Tore it open. "If Darlene tries to pressure you out of the house, call Attorney Jensen in Seattle. He knows everything." I stared at the paper. Everything. My dad had expected this. He had known, even while he was dying, that the woman he married might turn on me. The realization broke my heart and hardened it all at once. He had left me a shield. I looked at the clock. It was late, but I grabbed my phone. I wasn't waiting until Friday. The next morning I made the call from my car in the office parking lot. My hands were clammy against the steering wheel, my heart hammering a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Attorney Jensen didn't even sound surprised when I told him about the rent demand. "Your father suspected she'd try to assert control," Jensen said. His voice a low, gravelly rumble that instantly made me feel safer. He was worried about her spending habits long before he passed. "That's why the house wasn't left to her, Madison. It's entirely in the trust. And the trust is entirely yours." "She thinks she owns it," I said, watching rain streak down the windshield. "She thinks she can kick me out." "She can't kick you out of a property you own," Jensen replied dryly. "But we can certainly remove her. She's essentially a guest who has worn out her welcome and is now attempting extortion. We can act immediately." "Friday," I said. "She gave me until Friday to pay. I want to do it then." "Understood. I'll prepare the paperwork. I'll bring a couple of officers from the sheriff's department, just in case. Situations like this, they tend to get volatile." What followed was a week of quiet preparation. Quiet on my end, at least. On theirs. It was a crescendo of entitlement. I went to work. Came home. I said nothing. Every time Darlene saw me, she smirked. She would tap her watch or make loud comments to Travis about cash flow, improving soon. She spent Thursday night on the phone with her friend, Linda, loudly enough for me to hear from the kitchen. "It's just tough love, Linda," Darlene sighed, swirling a glass of Merlot, my Merlot. "Madison needs to learn responsibility. She's been so ungrateful since the funeral. Refuses to contribute. I'm just trying to be a mother to her, but she makes it so hard." I gripped the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white. Ungrateful. Meanwhile, the boys were in rare form. Travis burned a cigarette hole in the vintage velvet armchair my dad had bought in the 90s. When I pointed it out, he shrugged. "Chill, Maddie. Once we renovate, this old junk is gone anyway. Mom promised me a leather sectional." Colby spent the night screaming at his computer screen, the rage over a lost video game echoing through the vents. At 2 a.m. he pounded on my door. "Yo, reset the router," he yelled through the wood. "I'm lagging. If I lose this match, it's on you." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to him kick the door one last time before storming off. Let them scream, I told myself. Let them burn the furniture. Let them plan their renovations. It was the hardest acting performance of my life. I had to play the beaten dog. I had to look scared. I had to let them believe they held all the cards. Thursday night, Darlene cornered me by the stairs. "Tomorrow morning, Madison," she said, her voice dropping to that icy whisper. "Don't make me chase you for it. 9 a.m. kitchen table." "I'll be there," I said softly. "With everything I owe you." She smiled, a predatory curving of red lips. Good girl. She didn't know I had already texted Jensen. So go. I went to sleep with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. The storm was coming, but for the first time I wasn't the one who was going to get wet. Friday morning arrived with a deceptive brightness. The sun filtered through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Dust I usually cleaned, but had neglected all week in favor of plotting my liberation. I walked into the living room at exactly 9 a.m. They were all there, a tableau of unearned arrogance. Darlene sat on the sofa, her legs crossed, sipping coffee with an air of regal expectation. Travis was sprawled on the recliner, his t-shirt dusted with bright orange Cheeto powder, crunching loudly with his mouth open. Colby didn't even look up. He was hunched over a handheld gaming console, thumbs flying, muttering curses under his breath. Darlene set her mug down as I entered. She extended a manicured hand, palm up. "Well," she asked, her voice tight. "Do you have it?" I didn't reach for my wallet. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the thick, bound copy of the will. I placed it gently on the coffee table, right on top of Darlene's Better Homes and Gardens magazine. "I'm not paying $800, I said softly. Darlene's eyes narrowed into slits. "Excuse me. We discussed this. If you don't pay." "In fact," I interrupted, my voice gaining strength, "you're all being evicted." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Colby paused his game. Then chaos erupted. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Darlene shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You can't evict us," Travis yelled, spraying crumbs. "You don't own Jack. This is my house." Darlene screamed, her face flushing a blotchy red. "I am his widow. I am the matriarch. How dare you threaten me in my own home?" She lunged for the papers on the table, intending to rip them apart. That's when the front door, which I had unlocked moments before, swung open. Attorney Jensen stepped inside, looking every bit the legal shark in his charcoal suit. Flanking him were two uniformed sheriff's deputies, their expressions stony and serious. Darlene froze, her hand hovering over the will. Her eyes darted from me to Jensen to the officers, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear crack her mask. "Mrs. Darlene," Jensen said, his voice filling the room. I believe you've already met the terms of the late Mr. Thorne's last will and testament. He promised me, Darlene stammered, her voice cracking into a strangled whisper. He told me the house was mine if anything happened. What was said and what was signed are two different things, Jensen replied coolly. He picked up the document I had placed on the table. I'll read the relevant clause again for clarity. I leave the house, all assets, and the $1.2 million trust to my daughter Madison. No other party is entitled to any portion. Travis and Colby went pale. The reality of the situation hit them like a physical blow. Their free ride wasn't just over. It had never existed. This is a mistake, Darlene whispered, tears welling up, tears of rage, not sorrow. You manipulated him. You made him sign that. The will is dated 4 years ago, Jensen countered. Long before his illness affected him. It is ironclad. One of the deputies stepped forward. Ma'am, you have been served an eviction notice. You have 14 days to vacate the premises. If you are not gone by then, we will return to forcibly remove you. Darlene collapsed back onto the sofa, looking small and defeated. Travis screamed a profanity and threw a pillow across the room. Colby just started crying, actual tears streaming down his face as he looked at his mother. But where are we gonna go? Colby whined. I looked at them, really looked at them, and felt nothing but relief. That, I said, echoing Darlene's words from Tuesday, sounds like a problem for the real world. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind Attorney Jensen and the deputies, the air in the living room shattered. Darlene didn't weep. She didn't plead. She transformed. Her face, usually a mask of carefully applied makeup and faux concern, twisted into a snarl that looked almost feral. You ungrateful little witch, she screamed, knocking her coffee mug off the table. It shattered against the hardwood, brown liquid splashing onto the rug she had claimed was hers. How dare you? After everything I've done for your father. After everything I've sacrificed. Sacrificed, I repeated, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. You've lived here rent-free. You've drained his accounts. You've treated me like a servant in my own home. That ends today. I'll sue you, she spat, advancing on me. I'll contest the will. Undue influence. Mental incompetence. I'll tie this up in court for years. You won't see a dime of that trust until you're gray. Go ahead, I said, stepping back toward the hallway. Jensen prepared for that. And unlike you, I have the money to fight it. Travis stood up, his face red. You can't just kick us out in 2 weeks. We have rights. Squatters' rights. You're not squatters, I said coldly. You're guests. And your invitation has been revoked. I turned and walked away, locking myself in my room before they could escalate to physical violence. The next 10 days were a living nightmare. The house became a war zone. They didn't pack quietly. They packed with vengeance. I heard furniture being dragged across the hardwood floors without pads, leaving deep gouges. I heard walls being banged, doors being slammed so hard the frames shook. Darlene spent hours on the phone, loudly weeping to anyone who would listen. Friends, relatives, the church group, spinning a narrative where I was the villainous stepdaughter throwing a grieving widow into the street. She's mentally unstable, Linda. I heard her sob one evening. She's just cruel. I fear for my safety. I ignored it. I kept my head down, went to work, and counted the days on my calendar. 4 days left. 3 days left. But as the deadline approached, a nagging paranoia set in. They were petty. They were vindictive. If they were going to leave, they were going to take everything they could carry. On Tuesday evening, 3 days before the deadline, I heard a loud thump from the hallway ceiling. The attic ladder. My heart stopped. The attic was where Dad kept the things that mattered. Not the expensive things but the sentimental ones. Photo albums, his military medals, my mother's old paintings. Open my door. The hallway was empty, but the pull-down cord for the attic was swinging slightly. I waited until I heard Travis and Colby arguing in the garage about how to fit a massive TV into a small sedan. Darlene was in the shower. Now was my chance. I pulled the ladder down and climbed up into the dusty, sweltering darkness of the attic. I needed to make sure they hadn't looted it yet. I clicked on the bare bulb overhead. The space was cluttered with boxes, mostly untouched. I breathed a sigh of relief. But then I saw it. In the far corner, tucked behind a stack of old holiday decorations, was a small, unfamiliar wooden crate. It wasn't dusty. Had been moved recently. I crawled over to it. It wasn't one of the family storage bins. It was a lockbox, heavy and reinforced. And taped to the bottom, hidden from casual view, was a key. I turned the key. The lock clicked. I wasn't looking for money. I wasn't looking for secrets. But as I lifted the lid, I realized I had found both. Inside the box, there were no jewels, no gold coins, no family heirlooms. It was filled with paper. Stacks of bank statements, bound with rubber bands, and a small leather-bound notebook. I sat on the insulation, the fiberglass itching my legs, and pulled out the top stack. It was from a bank I didn't recognize. A separate account my father must have kept private. I flipped to the statements from 6 months ago, right when his cancer had taken a turn for the worse and he had been largely bedridden. My breath hitched. Withdrawal: $4,500. Cash. Transfer: $2,000. Investments: Travis. Withdrawal: $6,000. Casino Morongo. I flipped the page. The dates aligned perfectly with his chemotherapy treatments. On days when I was holding his hand in the hospital, watching him sleep through the nausea, Darlene had been busy. She hadn't just been spending his money. She had been draining him. I opened the leather notebook. It was Dad's handwriting, but it was shaky, weak. Noticed balance drop. Dee said it was for medical bills. Called insurance. Covered 100%. She's lying. Found credit card in my name. Maxed out. $15,000. Dee swore it was identity theft. Found the new purse in her trunk the next day. I'm too tired to fight her. She controls the meds. I just want peace. I'll secure the trust for Maddie. It's the only way to save what's left. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging. He knew. He had known she was robbing him, but he was too sick, too weak, and perhaps too afraid of her withholding his care to stop her. She had preyed on a dying man. This wasn't just entitlement. It was elder abuse. It was fraud. It was criminal. A floorboard creaked below me. Where is the big suitcase? Darlene's voice drifted up through the floorboards, muffled but distinct. She was in the hallway. I think it's in the attic, Travis replied. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. If they found me up here with this box, with the proof of their crimes, God only knows what they would do. They were desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. I quickly shoved the papers back into the box. I couldn't take the whole crate. It was too bulky to hide under my shirt. I grabbed the notebook and the most damning stack of statements, shoving them deep into the waistband of my leggings, pulling my oversized sweater down to cover the bulge. I closed the box and pushed it back behind the holiday decorations, arranging the dust bunnies to make it look undisturbed. I'm not going up there, Travis whined. It's hot and there are spiders. Just use the duffel bags. Ugh, fine, Darlene snapped. Useless. Both of you. I heard her heels click-clack away down the hall. I waited 5 agonizing minutes, counting the seconds in the dark, before I dared to descend. I moved like a ghost, easing the ladder up silently. I sprinted to my room, locked the door, and threw the documents onto my bed. I took photos of every page. My hands were shaking so hard the first few were blurry, and I had to retake them. I sent them to Jensen with a text. Found this in the attic. Is this enough to stop her from contesting the will? His reply came 2 minutes later. Stop her. Madison, this puts her in prison. Do not engage. I'm coming over. The waiting was the worst part. For 40 minutes, I sat on the edge of my bed, the incriminating notebook clutching to my chest like a shield. Downstairs, the sounds of chaotic packing continued. The rip of packing tape, the thump of heavy boxes, Darlene snapping at Travis to be careful with her fine china. When the doorbell finally rang, it cut through the noise like a siren. I heard Darlene's footsteps click-clack across the foyer. "If that's the pizza, tell them they forgot the soda last time," Travis yelled from the living room. I unlocked my door and crept to the top of the stairs just in time to hear Darlene open the front door. "Attorney Jensen," Darlene said, her voice dripping with irritation. "To what do I owe the pleasure? We still have 3 days. You can't bully us out early." "May I come in, Mrs. Thorne?" Jensen asked. It wasn't really a question. He stepped past her, followed not by the sheriff's deputies this time, but by a severe-looking woman in a blazer I didn't recognize. I hurried down the stairs, the notebook burning in my hands. Darlene whipped around, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. "What is this?" she hissed. "Another ambush." "It's an intervention," Jensen said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. He placed his briefcase on the hall table and snapped the latches open. "Madison provided me with some documents this evening. Documents that clarify the financial situation considerably." He pulled out the printed copies of the bank statements I had texted him, along with a photocopy of Dad's journal entry. He held them out to Darlene. "I don't know what that is," she lied, backing away. She didn't take the papers, but her eyes locked onto them. She recognized the bank logo. She recognized the handwriting. "This," Jensen said, stepping forward, "is evidence of unauthorized withdrawals, credit card fraud, and elder abuse. We have dates, amounts, and a written record from your late husband detailing his suspicions that you were stealing from him while he was incapacitated." Travis and Colby had wandered into the hallway, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. They looked between their mother and the lawyer, confusion dawning into panic. "Mom?" Travis asked, his voice cracking. "What's he talking about?" "He's lying," Darlene shrieked, but the color had drained from her face, leaving her rouge standing out like clown paint. "My husband gave me that money. He wanted me to have it." "Did he also want you to open a credit card in his name and max it out at a casino while he was in chemotherapy?" Jensen asked, his voice sharp as a whip. "Because that is a felony, Darlene. And given the amount, we are looking at significant prison time." The room went dead silent. The word prison hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Prison," Colby squeaked. Jensen turned to the woman beside him. "This is a forensic accountant. She is ready to begin a full audit of every penny that moved through this household in the last 2 years. Unless..." Darlene was trembling now. Her hands were shaking so bad she had to clasp them together. "Unless what?" "Unless you agree to our terms," Jensen said. "You drop any claim to the estate. You waive your right to contest the will. And you vacate this property tonight." "Tonight?" Darlene gasped. "But if you are still on this property at sunrise," Jensen said, checking his watch, "I will hand this file to the district attorney. The choice is yours. Leave with your freedom or stay and face the consequences." Darlene looked at me. For a second I thought she might lunge at me. The hatred in her eyes was toxic. But then she looked at the file in Jensen's hand. She looked at her useless, terrified sons. She slumped, the fight draining out of her instantly. "Get the bags," she whispered to Travis. "Mom! Get the bags," she screamed, her voice breaking. "We're leaving. Now." The next hour was a spectacle of pathetic desperation. Under the watchful eye of Attorney Jensen and the forensic accountant, the renovation team was reduced to 3 frantic people shoving clothes into black garbage bags. There was no careful wrapping of china. No organized stacking of boxes. It was a loot-and-run operation, except they were only allowed to take what was rightfully theirs. Jensen stood by the front door like a sentinel, his arms crossed. Every time Travis tried to sneak something questionable, like the vintage sound system, Jensen would clear his throat and Travis would sullenly put it back. "That belongs to the estate," Jensen said calmly when Darlene tried to walk out with my mother's silver candelabras. "I polished these for 2 years." Darlene spat, her hair disheveled, sweat beading on her upper lip. "And now you can leave them," Jensen replied. "Move it along." The house echoed with the sounds of zippers snapping and Colby whining about how he couldn't fit his gaming chair into the sedan. "Leave the chair, you idiot," Travis yelled from the driveway. "Just get in the car." I stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching the parade of dysfunction. It was surreal. For months, they had walked through this house like giants, their footsteps heavy with entitlement. Now they scurried like roaches when the lights turn on. Finally, the trunk of Darlene's car was tied shut with a bungee cord, bulging with duvet covers and duffel bags. The back seat was packed so high with trash bags that Colby had to squeeze into a tiny pocket of space against the window. Darlene was the last to leave. She stood in the doorway, her keys clutched in her hand, looking back at the house she had tried to steal. Then her eyes found mine. There was no remorse, no apology, just a cold, hard stare. "You think you've won," she hissed, her voice low enough so Jensen wouldn't hear. "But this house is a curse, Madison. It's too big for you. It's too old. You'll be broke in a year, and you'll die alone just like your father." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she couldn't hurt me anymore. She was just a bitter woman with a maxed-out credit card and nowhere to go. "My father didn't die alone," I said, my voice steady. "He died with me holding his hand. And he died knowing exactly who you were. Goodbye, Darlene." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. She turned on her heel, marched down the walkway, and got into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered, likely due to lack of maintenance, before roaring to life. I watched as the taillights disappeared down the rain-slicked street. Jensen stepped out onto the porch and exhaled a long breath. "Well, that was efficient." "Thank you," I said, leaning against the doorframe, suddenly feeling the weight of the last 3 months crash down on me. "I don't know how to thank you." "Your father already did," Jensen smiled kindly. "He paid my retainer 5 years ago. He wanted to make sure you were safe. I think we can say, mission accomplished." He handed me a card. "Call me tomorrow. We have a lot of paperwork to formalize, but for tonight, lock the door. It's finally yours." I watched him drive away. Then I stepped inside. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. Silence. For the first time in 3 months, I woke up without an alarm clock, and without the dread that usually sat heavy in my stomach. The silence in the house was profound. It wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of peace. No thumping bass from the bedroom next door. No aggressive clattering of pans in the kitchen. No sing-song voices making passive-aggressive demands. I spent the first few hours performing what felt like an exorcism. I opened every window, letting the cool, rain-washed air circulate through the stale rooms. I stripped the beds in the guest rooms, the ones Travis and Colby had defiled with their laziness, and threw the sheets directly into the trash. Some things weren't worth washing. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until the granite shone, erasing the sticky rings of soda cans and the ghost of Darlene's presence. With every wipe of the sponge, I felt lighter. I was reclaiming my territory, inch by inch. But as the afternoon wore on and the cleaning frenzy subsided, the adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation began to fade. In its place, a strange, quiet melancholy settled in. I walked into the living room and sat on the vintage velvet armchair, the one Travis had burned a hole in. I ran my thumb over the rough edge of the singed fabric. It was a scar, a permanent reminder of the invasion. Darlene's parting words echoed in my mind. "You'll be broke in a year, and you'll die alone just like your father." She was wrong, of course. I had the trust, had the house, had my job. But the alone part, that stung. The house was massive. It was built for a family, for noise, for life. Now it was just me and the creaking floorboards. I looked up at the ceiling toward the hallway hatch. My mind drifted back to the attic. In the panic of hiding the evidence from Travis, I hadn't really looked around. I had just grabbed the box with the bank statements and ran. But I remembered something. When I had shoved the legal box back behind the holiday decorations, my hand had brushed against something else. Something metal. A nagging curiosity pulled me from the chair. I pulled the ladder down again. The attic air was still warm, smelling of insulation and old cedar. I climbed up, flashlight in hand. I crawled back to the corner where I had found the evidence of Darlene's fraud. The space was empty now, save for the dust outline where the box had sat. But behind that spot, tucked even further into the eaves, half buried under a heavy wool blanket my father used to take camping, was another box. This one was smaller. A deep hunter green metal lockbox. My heart quickened. The first box had been a shield, a weapon to fight off the predators. But the war was over. So what was this? I dragged it out into the light. There was no key taped to the bottom this time. I rattled the lid. I sat there for a moment thinking. Dad was meticulous. He wouldn't leave a locked box without a way to open it. I thought about his keychain, the one I had kept on my nightstand since the funeral. It had his car key, the house key, and a small rusted silver key that didn't fit any door in the house. I scrambled down the ladder, retrieved the keys, and climbed back up. The small silver key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. I took a deep breath. The first box had saved my home. I had a feeling this one was going to save something else. I lifted the lid. Inside the green metal box there was no money. There were no legal documents. Instead there was a lifetime. It was filled with letters. Dozens of them. Some were sealed in envelopes. Others were just loose sheets of yellow legal pad paper folded into squares. On top rested a photograph I hadn't seen in 20 years. Me, age 5, sitting on my father's shoulders in the front yard of this very house, planting the oak tree that now shaded the driveway. My hands trembled as I picked up the letter resting on top. It was dated just 2 weeks before he died. The handwriting was barely legible, a scrawl of pain and persistence. To Maddie, for when the house is quiet again. I unfolded it, my breath catching in my throat. My dearest girl. If you are reading this, it means you fought. Means you stood up for yourself. I knew you would. I'm sorry I couldn't fight this battle for you while I was here. I was too tired, and I made mistakes trying to find companionship in the wrong place. But I never made a mistake about you. Darlene will tell you that you are selfish. She will try to make you feel small. Do not listen. You are the strongest person I know. I built this house, Maddie, but you are the one who made it a home. Don't let the silence scare you. Silence isn't emptiness. It's room to grow. Don't keep the house as a museum to me. Paint the walls. Change the carpets. Fill it with your own noise, your own music, your own life. It's yours now. Not just the deed but the spirit of it. You are never alone. I am in the floorboards, in the garden, and in your heart. I love you, kiddo. Dad. A sob broke loose from my chest, echoing in the quiet attic. But it wasn't a sob of despair. It was a release. It was the final brick falling off the weight I had been carrying for months. Darlene had tried to curse me with loneliness. She had tried to poison my memories of my father, making me doubt if he cared, making me feel like an interloper in his life. But with one sheet of paper, he had silenced her forever. He had played the long game, and he had made sure that when the dust settled, I would be standing on solid ground. I wiped my eyes and closed the box. I took it with me, leaving the darkness of the attic behind. I walked downstairs, the house feeling different now. It wasn't looming, it was embracing. I went to the living room and looked at the vintage armchair with a cigarette burn, the scar of Travis's disrespect. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt ready. I walked to the garage and found the paint cans left over from when the exterior was redone. I found a roller and a tray. I walked back into the living room, pushed the furniture to the center, and popped the lid off a can of morning sky blue. Travis had wanted to turn this place into a dark, soundproofed gaming dungeon. Darlene had wanted to keep it as a shrine to her own ego. I dipped the roller into the paint. The first stroke covered a scuff mark on the wall near the window. The bright, clean color stood out against the dingy beige Darlene had insisted on years ago. Kept painting. With every stroke I covered up the insults. I covered up the greed. I covered up the $800 a month. By the time the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the floor, the room was transformed. It smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. I stood in the center of the room, paint splattered on my cheek, exhaustion pulling at my muscles, but my heart was full. I wasn't rock bottom anymore. I was home. And as I looked out the window at the oak tree my father and I had planted, I pulled out my phone and deleted the contact labeled, Darlene. "You were right, Dad," I whispered to the quiet room. "There is plenty of room to grow." The house was mine. The money was safe. But the real inheritance was the knowledge that I was capable of saving myself. I turned on the radio, filling the silence with my own music, and started on the next wall.